Hi scary lovers, welcome to today's video. Let's unravel the spooky side of life through the lens of a storyteller. Join me on my journey as I dive into chilling tales and true crime mysteries. The Rake. It was a chilly autumn night when I first encountered the Rake. I was home alone, curled up on the couch with a book, the soft glow of the lamp casting shadows across the room. The wind howled outside, and leaves rattled against the window, creating an eerie symphony that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I had heard stories about the Rake, whispers among friends, and chilling accounts on forums late at night. They spoke of a creature with pale skin, elongated limbs, and haunting eyes that seemed to pierce right through you. But I had always dismissed them as mere tales to scare children. That was until I began to hear things. It started as a soft scratching sound, almost like fingernails dragging against the wooden floor. I paused, straining to listen. I convinced myself it was just the house settling, an old creak in the floorboards. But then it came again, louder this time. I could feel my heart racing, and I tried to shake off the growing dread creeping into my mind. After a few moments of silence, I decided to investigate. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen and slowly made my way up the stairs. Each step creaked under my weight, echoing in the stillness of the house. I reached the top and scanned the dim hallway. The air felt thick, charged with an energy that set me on edge. As I approached my bedroom, I saw it. A figure crouched in the corner, its back to me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The creature was unnaturally thin, its skin a sickly gray. I could see its bony fingers twitching, and I felt an overwhelming urge to turn and run. But I couldn't move. I was paralyzed by fear. Suddenly, it turned its head, and I was met with hollow, sunken eyes that seemed to absorb the light around them. A chill ran down my spine as the Rake opened its mouth, emitting a low, guttural sound that sent waves of terror coursing through me. Instinct kicked in, and I stumbled backward, racing down the hall, my heart pounding in my chest. I barreled down the stairs and darted into the living room, slamming the door behind me. I fumbled for my phone, praying it would work, but the screen flickered, no signal. I was alone, trapped in my own home with something sinister lurking just beyond the door. Then I heard it again, the scratching, now right outside. It was relentless, as if the Rake was taunting me, eager to get in. I pressed my back against the wall, clutching the flashlight like a lifeline, my mind racing with thoughts of what it wanted. Hours felt like minutes as I waited, listening to the scratching and the occasional soft thud against the door. I didn't dare to sleep, fearing that if I closed my eyes, I might never wake up. Finally, as dawn approached, the sounds faded, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. I thought it was over, that I was safe. But as I stepped outside to greet the morning light, I noticed something on the ground. A series of deep scratches leading from my door into the woods. My heart sank. I realized the Rake wasn't just a story. It was real, and it had been watching me, waiting for the moment I would let my guard down. Even now, I can feel its presence lurking in the shadows, and I know that it's only a matter of time before it returns. The Midnight Game. It started as a dare among friends, a challenge to test our courage. We gathered in my house one rainy night, the sound of thunder rumbling ominously outside. The dim light from candles flickered, casting unsettling shadows on the walls as we huddled together, exchanging nervous glances. "Have you heard of the Midnight Game?" one of my friends asked, a mischievous grin on his face. "It's supposed to summon a spirit. You just need to follow the rules." Curiosity piqued. We listened intently as he recited the steps. You write your name on a piece of paper, prick your finger to draw blood, and light a candle. Then, at exactly midnight, you open the door and invite the spirit in. The aim is to avoid being caught by the entity for an hour, or else you face dire consequences. We were skeptical but intrigued. As the clock struck midnight, we decided to go through with it. I grabbed a pen and wrote my name, feeling a shiver run down my spine as I pricked my finger, letting a drop of blood stain the paper. We lit our candles, the flickering flames illuminating our anxious faces. With a deep breath, I opened the front door, letting the cold air rush in. "Welcome," I whispered as the clock chimed again. The atmosphere shifted, a heavy weight settling around us as if the air had thickened. We split up, each of us wandering through the darkened house, trying to keep our minds off the rising panic. I wandered into the living room, the candlelight casting eerie shadows that danced around me. My heart raced as I tried to focus on the flickering flame, but the silence grew oppressive. Suddenly, I heard a soft whisper, a faint voice calling my name. "Come, play." It echoed through the hall, sending chills down my spine. I froze, my breath quickening as I strained to listen. It was coming from the kitchen. I made my way cautiously, the candle flickering wildly as I approached the doorway. Peering inside, I saw nothing but shadows. Just as I was about to back away, the whisper came again, clearer this time. "Join us." In that moment, I felt an overwhelming dread wash over me. I turned to run back to my friends, but as I did, the temperature dropped drastically. My breath misted in front of me, and the candle flickered violently. I stumbled, the flame sputtering as I lost my grip. In a panic, I fumbled for another candle, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear footsteps now, shuffling behind me, following my every move. I darted down the hallway, desperately trying to find my friends, but the oppressive darkness seemed to close in around me. "Guys!" I shouted, my voice echoing through the empty house. No response, just the relentless whispers, growing louder, more insistent. "Come play." I reached the living room and saw them huddled together, faces pale and eyes wide with fear. "We have to end this," I cried, but before I could explain, the candles flickered one last time and went out. Darkness enveloped us, a suffocating blackness that swallowed all light. Panic set in as I felt a cold breeze brush past me. The whispers now a cacophony of voices, all chanting my name. I could feel something lurking just beyond the edges of the darkness, something hungry, waiting for the moment to strike. In a moment of desperation, I remembered the rules, how to end the game. "We need to extinguish our candles and say our names," I yelled, scrambling to find the matches in the dark. I caught the flicker of a match as my friend struck it, and we all quickly blew out our candles. As the last flame flickered out, a deafening silence fell over us. The whispers ceased, and an eerie calm enveloped the room. We stood there, breathless, trembling, unsure if we had escaped or if the darkness had merely retreated. Finally, we gathered our courage and turned on the lights. The room looked normal, but the weight of the experience lingered. We vowed never to speak of it again, but even now, when the clock strikes midnight, I can still hear the faint whispers calling my name, as if the midnight game is never truly over. The Headless Horseman. It was a crisp autumn evening when I decided to take a ride through Sleepy Hollow, a place rich with tales of the supernatural. I had heard the stories of the Headless Horseman since childhood, the ghostly figure that rode through the night seeking vengeance, forever searching for his lost head. I dismissed them as mere folklore, but something about the crisp air and the rustling leaves pulled me to the legend. As I rode my horse along the winding paths, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that danced eerily in the fading light. The trees stood tall and ominous, their branches swaying gently in the wind. I felt a chill creep up my spine, but I brushed it off as nothing more than the evening chill. Suddenly, I heard the distant sound of hoofbeats echoing through the woods, a rhythmic thud that seemed to grow louder with each passing moment. My heart raced, and I glanced around, half expecting to see another rider emerge from the darkness. But the path was empty, shrouded in shadows. I urged my horse forward, hoping to shake off the unsettling feeling creeping into my chest. But the sound of the hoofbeats only intensified, now accompanied by the rustle of leaves as if something or someone was following me. I quickened my pace, the branches overhead snapping in the wind, their gnarled shapes resembling ghostly fingers reaching for me. Just as I rounded a bend, I caught sight of a figure in the distance. My heart sank as I recognized the silhouette of a rider, cloaked in darkness, a spectral glow surrounding him. The Headless Horseman. My breath caught in my throat as I realized the stories were true. He was real. I turned my horse and galloped back the way I came, adrenaline surging through my veins. The sound of hoofbeats echoed behind me, relentless and thunderous. I could feel the presence of the horseman drawing closer, the air thick with dread as I raced through the trees, branches clawing at me like desperate hands. In a burst of terror, I glanced back and saw him. His steed galloping faster than any horse should, and the rider, a dark figure with a hollow neck, where a head should have been. He held his pumpkin lantern high, illuminating the path ahead, its eerie glow casting flickering shadows that danced around me. I pushed my horse harder, the ground trembling beneath us as I fled. The horseman's laughter echoed through the night, a chilling sound that sent shivers down my spine. I knew I had to reach the bridge. Legend had it that the horseman could not cross it, but would pursue his prey to the very edge. As I approached the bridge, my heart raced with hope. I urged my horse forward, praying we could make it in time. But just as we reached the entrance, I felt a cold gust of wind sweep past me, and the laughter grew louder, more sinister. I could sense him closing in, his presence looming just behind me. With a final surge of energy, I crossed the bridge, the sound of the hoofbeats abruptly stopping behind me. I dared to look back, my heart pounding in my chest. The horseman stood at the edge, his figure silhouetted against the moonlight, a shadow of fury and despair. He raised his pumpkin, its light flickering ominously, and let out a scream that echoed through the night. I didn't stop to catch my breath. I rode as fast as I could, not daring to look back again. I raced through Sleepy Hollow, my heart still pounding, until I reached the safety of my home. I collapsed against the door, trembling, knowing that I had narrowly escaped a fate I couldn't fathom. Even now, as I write this, I can still hear the echo of his laughter in the wind, feel the chill of his presence lurking just beyond the shadows. The legend of the Headless Horseman is no longer just a story to me. It's a haunting reminder of the darkness that lies in the heart of Sleepy Hollow, waiting for its next victim. The Licked Hand. It was a stormy night when I found myself home alone, the wind howling like a pack of wolves outside. I had always been a little superstitious, but I brushed off the eerie atmosphere, telling myself it was just another night. I settled into bed, my dog, Max, curled up at my feet, providing a sense of comfort amidst the chaos outside. As the storm raged on, I heard the familiar sound of rain pelting against the windows, a soothing rhythm that almost lulled me to sleep. But just as I was about to drift off, I heard a strange noise, soft, scratching sounds coming from the back door. My heart raced as I sat up, straining to listen. I thought it might be the wind or perhaps a tree branch brushing against the house. "Max," I whispered, feeling for him in the darkness. He stirred slightly, letting out a soft whine, but remained at my feet. I felt a slight chill run down my spine. The scratching continued, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there. I decided to investigate, fueled by a mix of curiosity and fear. I crept out of bed, careful not to disturb Max, and tiptoed down the hallway towards the back door. The house was eerily quiet, save for the sound of the storm. I reached for the doorknob, hesitating for a moment before twisting it and pulling the door open. The cold, damp air rushed in, and I peered into the darkness outside. The yard was a blur of shadows, illuminated only by the occasional flash of lightning. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" My voice trembled slightly, swallowed by the night. No response, just the sound of rain and the distant rumble of thunder. I was about to close the door when I heard it again. A soft, scratching sound, but now it seemed to be coming from inside the house. My heart dropped, and I quickly shut the door, locking it tightly. I turned back to the hallway, my mind racing. What could be making that sound? I glanced at Max, who was still lying peacefully at the foot of my bed, seemingly unaware of the growing tension. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. "It's just the wind," I told myself, but a sense of dread settled over me. I decided to head back to bed, but as I turned to walk away, I felt something wet brush against my hand. I froze, a chill running through me. I looked down, expecting to see Max nudging my hand, but he was still lying down, oblivious. Confused, I reached out again, and once more, I felt the warm, wet lick. "Max!" I whispered, my voice trembling. I turned to look at him, but he was still in place, his eyes closed. Panic surged through me as I realized the truth. The licking wasn't coming from my dog. I turned slowly, my heart pounding, and that's when I saw it. A dark figure crouched in the shadows, its eyes glinting in the dim light. It was a creature unlike anything I had seen, with long, bony fingers and a twisted, grinning mouth. It reached out towards me, its tongue flicking out to lick my hand, a grotesque mockery of affection. I stumbled back, a scream catching in my throat, but it was too late. The creature lunged at me, its laughter echoing like nails on a chalkboard. I turned and ran, adrenaline propelling me forward as I dashed down the hallway, desperate to escape. I burst into the living room, locking the door behind me, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I could hear it scratching at the door, the sound sending waves of terror through me. I grabbed my phone, fumbling to dial for help, but all I could hear was the relentless scratching and that awful laughter. As I waited for the dawn to break, I clutched Max tightly, whispering reassurances to myself that it was just a nightmare. But deep down, I knew the truth. The creature had licked my hand, and it would be back. The darkness was hungry, and it hadn't finished with me yet. Even now, as I sit here writing this, I can still feel that cold, wet tongue brushing against my skin. I can still hear the laughter echoing in my mind, a chilling reminder that some things are better left in the shadows. The Phantom Train. It was a dreary evening when my friends and I decided to explore the old railway tracks that wound through the outskirts of our town. The stories we had heard about the Phantom Train were whispered among locals. Tales of a ghostly locomotive that appeared on foggy nights, its eerie whistle echoing through the valley, a remnant of a tragic accident from decades ago. As we made our way down the overgrown path, the sun began to set, casting an orange glow that quickly faded into twilight. The air turned crisp, and a thick fog started to roll in, wrapping around the trees and swallowing the landscape. I felt an unsettling chill creep up my spine, but my friends were buzzing with excitement, eager to capture the adventure on their phones. We reached the tracks just as darkness fell, the old wooden ties creaking underfoot. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and I could hear the distant rustle of leaves in the wind. "Let's wait here for a bit," suggested Jake, ever the thrill-seeker. The others nodded in agreement, settling down on the edge of the tracks. I hesitated, glancing down the darkened path, unsure if this was a good idea. As we sat in silence, the fog deepened, swirling around us like a living thing. The world felt eerily still, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Just as I was about to voice my concerns, a distant sound pierced the silence. A low, haunting whistle that sent chills down my spine. "What was that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the growing tension. "Probably just an old train," Jake replied, trying to dismiss my fear, but there was an edge of uncertainty in his tone. The whistle echoed again, closer this time, reverberating through the fog. It was followed by a rhythmic clattering, like metal wheels grinding against the tracks. We exchanged nervous glances, the excitement in the air shifting to something darker. "Let's get out of here," I said, instinctively rising to my feet. But before I could take a step, the ground trembled beneath us, and the sound grew louder, booming like thunder. Suddenly, through the thick fog, the outline of a massive train appeared, its lights cutting through the darkness like a beacon. Panic surged through me as I realized this was no ordinary train. It was old steam billowing from its engine, and the windows were dark, void of any life. Yet it was moving toward us with an unnatural speed. "Run!" I screamed, adrenaline surging as I turned to bolt back down the path. My friends followed, their footsteps pounding against the ground, but the sound of the train grew louder, drowning out everything else. I glanced back in horror to see the train barreling toward us, its whistle shrieking like a banshee, the ground shaking beneath its weight. We raced along the tracks, desperately trying to escape, but the train was relentless, its lights illuminating the fog in a surreal glow. I could feel the heat from the engine, the air thick with the smell of smoke and iron. It was as if it were chasing us, intent on catching its prey. Just as I thought we would be swallowed by the darkness, the train suddenly vanished, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. We stumbled to a halt, panting and wide-eyed, the echo of the whistle fading into silence. "What just happened?" Sarah gasped, her voice trembling. We stood there for a moment, hearts racing, searching the fog for any sign of the train. But there was nothing, just the oppressive silence of the night. We hurried back to our cars, the fear still pulsing through us. As I drove home, I couldn't shake the image of the phantom train from my mind. I knew I would never return to those tracks again. Even now, as I try to forget that night, I still sometimes hear the distant whistle in the dead of night, a haunting reminder that some legends are more than just stories. They are warnings, and the phantom train still roams the foggy tracks, waiting for its next encounter. The Cursed Box. It was an ordinary Saturday when I stumbled upon the antique shop on the corner of Maple Street. The shop was small, its windows dusty and dimly lit, but something about it drew me in. I had always been fascinated by old things, each item holding a story of its own, a piece of history waiting to be uncovered. As I browsed through the clutter, my eyes landed on a small, ornate box tucked away in a corner. It was beautifully carved, with intricate designs etched into the wood, but there was something unsettling about it. I felt an inexplicable pull, as if the box was calling to me. Ignoring my instincts, I picked it up, feeling a chill run down my spine as my fingers brushed against its surface. "Ah, you found the cursed box," the shopkeeper said, his voice low and gravelly. I looked up, startled. "Legend has it that anyone who possesses it will face a series of misfortunes. You sure you want to take it home?" I hesitated, the weight of the box feeling heavier in my hands. But curiosity got the better of me, and I shrugged off his warning. "I'll take it," I said, handing over the cash. That night, I placed the box on my dresser, admiring its craftsmanship. The moment I set it down, a strange sensation washed over me, an unsettling feeling that something was off. I shook it off, convincing myself it was just my imagination. But as the days passed, odd things began to happen. My phone screen cracked inexplicably while sitting on the table, and I tripped over my own feet, falling and bruising my knee. At first, I brushed these incidents aside as bad luck, but they kept piling up. The final straw came when my beloved cat, Whiskers, went missing, vanishing without a trace. Desperate and heartbroken, I searched everywhere for him, but he was nowhere to be found. It was then that I remembered the shopkeeper's warning. The box sat ominously on my dresser, and I felt a knot of dread tighten in my stomach. I couldn't shake the feeling that the box was somehow tied to my misfortunes. One night, unable to sleep, I decided to open the box, hoping to find some answers. I took a deep breath and lifted the lid. Inside, I found a collection of old trinkets, a tarnished locket, a faded photograph of a woman, and a small key. As I picked up the locket, a cold breeze swept through the room, extinguishing my bedside lamp. I felt a presence, a chill in the air that made my skin crawl. Suddenly, the photograph slipped from my fingers and fluttered to the floor. I bent down to pick it up, and as I did, I caught a glimpse of the woman's face. It was hauntingly beautiful, but her eyes held an emptiness that sent chills through me. I felt a surge of panic and slammed the box shut, my heart racing. That night, I was woken by a soft scratching sound at my window. My heart pounded in my chest as I sat up, glancing around the dark room. The scratching grew louder, more insistent. I mustered the courage to approach the window and peeked outside, but nothing was there. Just as I turned to go back to bed, I heard Whiskers' familiar meow echoing through the darkness. My heart leapt, and I rushed to the door, flinging it open. As I stepped out into the hallway, I felt an icy grip around my ankle. I looked down to see a shadowy figure clinging to me, its face hidden in darkness. Panicking, I stumbled back, trying to shake it off, but it only tightened its grip. I screamed, writhing against the force that held me. In that moment, I knew I had unleashed something malevolent with the box. It was more than just a cursed object. It was a vessel for a dark spirit, bound to wreak havoc on anyone who dared to possess it. With one final surge of strength, I kicked the box across the room, watching as it crashed into the wall and burst open. The trinkets scattered, and the shadowy figure dissipated into the air with a chilling wail. The atmosphere shifted, and I felt the weight lift from my chest. The next morning, I returned to the antique shop, my heart heavy with regret. I handed the box back to the shopkeeper, my hands shaking. "I don't want it anymore," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded knowingly, a grim expression on his face. "Some objects are not meant to be held," he replied, taking the box from me. As I left the shop, I felt the weight of the curse lift, but the lingering fear remained. I would never forget the darkness that had seeped into my life through that cursed object, a chilling reminder that some treasures are best left untouched. The Woman in White. It was a chilly night when I found myself driving down an isolated country road, the kind that twisted and turned through dense woods and rolling hills. I had been visiting a friend and lost track of time, the sun dipping below the horizon and leaving me surrounded by darkness. The headlights of my car cut through the night, illuminating the winding path ahead. As I drove, I recalled the stories I had heard growing up about the Woman in White, a ghostly figure said to wander these very roads, searching for something lost. Legend had it that she would appear to weary travelers, luring them into the woods, never to return. I brushed off the stories as mere folklore, but an unsettling feeling crept over me as I drove deeper into the night. Suddenly, I saw her, a figure standing by the side of the road, dressed in a flowing white gown that glimmered eerily in the headlights. My heart raced as I slowed down, curiosity overtaking my caution. I rolled down the window, peering into the darkness. "Are you okay?" I called out, my voice trembling slightly. The woman turned to face me, her long hair cascading down her shoulders. Her eyes were wide and hollow, filled with a sadness that sent chills down my spine. "Help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the engine. "I need to get to my home." Against my better judgment, I opened the passenger door. "Get in," I said, my heart pounding in my chest. She slid into the seat, her presence filling the car with an icy chill. I could see her more clearly now, the way her dress seemed to float around her, almost as if she were not entirely of this world. As I drove, she pointed down a path that led further into the woods. "This way," she urged, her voice barely above a whisper. The air grew heavy with tension, and I felt an overwhelming urge to turn back. But driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, I continued down the darkened road. "Where is your home?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation going and dispel the unease that was building within me. She hesitated, her gaze fixed on the trees outside. "I lost my way," she replied, her voice trailing off. "I've been searching for so long." A knot formed in my stomach as we ventured deeper into the woods. The trees loomed overhead, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The atmosphere felt suffocating, and I could sense something was terribly wrong. I glanced at her, and for a brief moment, I saw a flicker of desperation in her eyes. Suddenly, the car engine sputtered, and the lights flickered. Panic surged through me as the vehicle came to a halt. I turned the key in the ignition, but nothing happened. Silence enveloped us. My heart raced as I looked at the woman, who was now staring intently at something outside the window. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Get out," she said, her voice sharp and commanding. "You must leave." Before I could respond, she opened the door and stepped out into the darkness. "Wait," I shouted, but she vanished into the shadows, leaving me alone in the car. I could feel the weight of the night pressing down on me, the air thick with an unnatural silence. I took a deep breath and forced myself to get out of the car, searching for her in the darkness. "Where are you?" I called, my voice echoing in the stillness. The trees loomed ominously, and I felt the cold grip of fear tighten around me. Then I heard it, a soft weeping sound coming from deeper within the woods. Against my better judgment, I followed the sound, my heart pounding in my chest. As I ventured further, the weeping grew louder, more desperate. I stumbled into a small clearing, and there she was, standing at the edge of a shallow grave, her white gown billowing in the night air. "Help me," she pleaded, her voice filled with anguish. "You have to help me find peace." My gut twisted with dread as I stepped closer. "What happened to you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She turned to face me, and in that moment, I saw the truth. Her eyes were filled with sorrow, but there was something darker lurking beneath the surface. "I was betrayed," she said, her voice low and haunting. "And now I am trapped. You must take my place." Realization hit me like a cold wave. The stories were true. She wasn't just lost. She was a spirit bound to this place, seeking vengeance on those who wandered too close. "Get away from me," I shouted, panic surging through me as I stumbled back. I turned and ran, the sound of her anguished cries chasing after me. I dashed through the trees, branches clawing at my skin, my heart racing as I fought to escape the darkness. I finally reached my car, fumbling with the door and jumping inside. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my hands shaking as I turned the key in the ignition. To my relief, the engine roared to life, and I sped down the road, the haunting cries fading into the night behind me. As I drove away, I could still feel her presence lingering, the weight of her sorrow hanging in the air. I would never forget the woman in white, nor the terror that came with her. I knew that I had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death, and I would never again venture down those darkened roads, where spirits roamed free and the past refused to let go. The eyes in the dark. It was a quiet evening when I first noticed them, those unsettling eyes in the dark. I had just moved into a small cabin in the woods, seeking solace away from the chaos of the city. The isolation was supposed to be peaceful, a chance to recharge. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, an unsettling feeling settled over me. That first night, I sat by the fireplace, the soft crackle of the flames filling the room as shadows danced on the walls. I tried to immerse myself in a book, but an inexplicable sense of being watched crept over me. Every time I glanced towards the window, I felt a prick of fear, as if something lurked just beyond the glass. As the hours passed and darkness enveloped the cabin, I decided to turn in early. The moonlight streamed through the window, casting eerie shapes across the floor. I settled into bed, pulling the blankets tightly around me, but sleep eluded me. Each creak of the cabin seemed amplified, echoing in the stillness of the night. Then I saw them, two glowing eyes staring at me from the corner of the room, just beyond the reach of the moonlight. My heart raced and I froze. They were unblinking, reflecting the faint light, and they seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. I couldn't tell what they belonged to, but a primal fear gripped me. "Is someone there?" I called out, my voice trembling. No answer. The eyes remained, watching, waiting. I felt paralyzed, unable to move or look away. Every logical thought fled my mind, replaced by sheer terror. After what felt like an eternity, I mustered the courage to reach for my phone on the bedside table, desperately wanting to illuminate the room. As I fumbled for it, the eyes suddenly vanished. The darkness felt thicker, suffocating, and I could hear the sound of my own heartbeat reverberating in my ears. I switched on the flashlight, casting a beam across the room, but there was nothing there, just shadows and the remnants of my fears. I sighed, trying to convince myself it was merely my mind playing tricks on me. After a few moments, I finally closed my eyes, hoping to drift into a restless sleep. But the next night, they returned. This time, I was more prepared. I sat up in bed, determined to confront whatever was watching me. As the moonlight spilled into the room, I spotted them again. Those glowing eyes, now closer than before, hovering just outside the window. My breath caught in my throat, and I could feel a cold sweat forming on my skin. "Show yourself," I shouted, my voice echoing in the stillness. The eyes blinked once, then disappeared into the dark. I felt a rush of relief, but it was short-lived. I could hear faint scratching sounds against the wooden frame of the window, a sound that sent chills down my spine. I jumped out of bed, heart racing as I approached the window. As I drew closer, the scratching intensified, and those eyes reappeared, more menacing than before. They were now accompanied by a low growl, a deep rumble that resonated in my chest. Panic surged through me, and I stumbled back, almost tripping over my own feet. I dashed to the door, my instincts screaming at me to get out. I flung it open and stepped outside, the cool night air hitting my skin. But as I turned to look back at the cabin, I froze in horror. The eyes were no longer confined to the window. They were everywhere. Shadows danced around the cabin, and I could see them glinting from behind trees, peeking out from the darkness. I ran into the woods, branches clawing at my arms as I pushed through the underbrush, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I could still hear the growling, echoing in the night, as if something was hunting me. Every rustle of leaves and snapping of twigs sent me into a panic. I stumbled deeper into the woods, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Just when I thought I might escape, I tripped over a root and fell to the ground. As I lay there, gasping for breath, I felt the presence closing in around me. The eyes were everywhere now, hovering just above me, watching, waiting. With a surge of desperation, I scrambled to my feet and ran again. But the ground beneath me felt unstable, and I could sense something behind me, stalking me in the shadows. I burst through the underbrush and found myself at the edge of a small clearing, moonlight illuminating the space like a spotlight. But there, in the center of the clearing, I saw it. A grotesque figure emerging from the shadows, the eyes glowing fiercely in the darkness. It was a monstrous shape, with elongated limbs and a twisted grin that sent waves of terror crashing over me. I turned to flee, but the forest seemed to close in around me, branches reaching out like hands, pulling me back. I could feel the presence behind me, breathing down my neck, its growl reverberating in my bones. In a final burst of energy, I broke free from the woods and sprinted towards my car, fumbling for my keys as I stumbled. I could feel the air thickening around me, the growl getting louder, closer. I jumped into my car, slamming the door shut and locking it just as I heard a deafening crash against the window. I turned the ignition and sped away, my heart racing, the eyes fading into the darkness behind me. But even as I drove, I could still sense them lurking, waiting for the night to embrace me once more. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that those eyes are watching me, whether in the shadows of the woods or the corners of my mind. I left the cabin and the woods behind, but I know that some things never truly let go. The eyes in the dark will always haunt me, a reminder of the terror that lurks just beyond the light. The Wendigo. It was supposed to be a weekend getaway, a chance to reconnect with nature and escape the stress of city life. My friends and I had rented a small cabin deep in the woods of northern Michigan, far away from civilization. As we drove further along the winding dirt road, the trees closed in around us, their branches forming a dark canopy overhead. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, but as we arrived at the cabin, I couldn't shake a lingering sense of unease. The first night was filled with laughter and stories around the fire, the warmth of the flames pushing back the chill of the night air. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, an unnatural stillness fell over the woods. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the distant hoot of an owl. I glanced at my friends, their faces illuminated by the flickering light, but I felt an unsettling sensation creeping in, a prickling awareness that something was watching us. As the evening wore on, we decided to venture into the woods for a night hike, emboldened by the excitement of adventure. Armed with flashlights, we trekked deeper into the forest, the beams of light cutting through the darkness. Laughter echoed through the trees, but I found myself lagging behind, feeling a gnawing sense of foreboding. "Come on, slowpoke," Jake called back, urging me to catch up. I picked up my pace, but the deeper we went, the more the air felt heavy and oppressive. I could sense it then, a presence lurking just beyond the reach of our lights. After a while, we reached a clearing, a vast expanse surrounded by towering trees. We took a moment to catch our breath, but as I scanned the area, I noticed something odd. The ground was covered in a thick layer of snow, despite it being late spring. There were no tracks, no signs of wildlife, no footprints. Felt wrong. Suddenly, a chill ran down my spine. I turned to the group, but they were laughing, oblivious to the tension that had settled around us. "Hey, let's head back," I suggested, my voice shaky. "I'm not feeling great about this place." "Oh, come on, just a little longer," Lisa replied, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Reluctantly, I followed them deeper into the woods, even as my instincts screamed for me to turn back. As we walked, I began to hear rustling in the underbrush, faint but unmistakable. It sounded like something was moving, something large. I glanced over my shoulder, but the darkness swallowed any trace of movement. I quickened my pace, trying to keep my fears at bay. Just as we were about to turn back, we heard it. A low, mournful howl that echoed through the trees. Chilled me to the bone. "What was that?" Jake asked, his voice suddenly serious. "Probably just a wolf," Lisa said, but her confidence wavered. We stood in silence for a moment, the only sound the wind rustling through the branches. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of something moving between the trees. A figure, tall and gaunt, its limbs impossibly long. "Did you see that?" I whispered, my heart racing. "What?" Jake replied, scanning the shadows. "There's something out there," I insisted, pointing into the darkness. But as I looked again, it was gone. The woods felt heavy, the air thick with an unshakable dread. We hurried back to the cabin, the howling wind and rustling leaves amplifying our growing panic. Once inside, we locked the door and gathered around the fireplace, trying to shake off the feeling of unease. But the atmosphere had shifted. The laughter had died down, replaced by a palpable tension. As the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. The wind howled outside, and I swore I could hear something scratching at the walls, a faint scraping sound that sent shivers down my spine. I glanced at my friends, but they were too busy trying to entertain themselves to notice my growing anxiety. Just when I thought I could calm myself, I heard it again, a low growl resonating from just outside the cabin. My heart raced, and I felt a surge of panic. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Hear what?" Jake replied, dismissing my fears. I stood up, my instincts screaming for me to look outside. I approached the window and peered into the darkness. The moonlight illuminated the woods, but the shadows danced ominously, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just beyond the trees. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. A tall, emaciated creature with pale, gaunt features and piercing eyes that seemed to glow in the dark. Its long limbs moved unnaturally, and its mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. "Guys, we need to get out of here," I shouted. My friends finally turned to me, their expressions shifting from confusion to fear as they caught sight of the creature outside. It howled again, a chilling sound that echoed through the night, and we knew we had to act fast. We scrambled to gather our things, adrenaline surging through us. But as we moved, the creature circled the cabin, its eyes never leaving us. I could feel its hunger, an insatiable craving that sent terror coursing through my veins. "Lock the doors," I yelled, as I raced to the front door, fumbling with the lock. Just as I secured it, the creature slammed into the side of the cabin, shaking the walls and sending a jolt of fear through me. We huddled together, our breaths coming in quick gasps, listening as it prowled around us. The growls grew louder, more menacing, and I could hear the sound of its claws scraping against the wood. We were trapped, surrounded by a force we couldn't comprehend. In that moment, I understood the legend of the Wendigo, a spirit of insatiable hunger, forever cursed to roam the wilderness, preying on those who dared to enter its territory. As we clung to each other in the dim light of the cabin, I knew we had stumbled into its lair, and there would be no escape. As the night dragged on, the sounds of its torment echoed in my mind. We could only wait, praying for dawn to break, hoping that the light would banish the darkness that threatened to consume us. But deep down, I knew that some things in the woods were meant to remain undiscovered, and the Wendigo would always be there, lurking just beyond the shadows, waiting for its next meal. The killer in the back seat. It was a typical Friday night when I decided to leave the office late, the glow of my computer screen still fresh in my mind. The streets were nearly deserted, bathed in the soft amber light of street lamps as I made my way to the parking garage. I was exhausted, ready to unwind after a long week, but a nagging feeling settled over me as I approached my car. As I unlocked the door and slid into the driver's seat, I noticed something odd, a faint reflection in the rearview mirror. I glanced back, but the back seat was empty. I shook my head, dismissing it as paranoia. After a long week, who wouldn't feel a little jumpy? I started the car and pulled out of the garage, the engine purring softly as I navigated the empty streets. The quiet hum of the tires against the pavement was almost soothing, lulling me into a sense of calm. But as I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I glanced in the mirror again, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows of the back seat, but it was still empty. About halfway home, I stopped at a red light, the night air heavy with silence. Suddenly, I heard a faint noise, a soft, almost imperceptible rustling coming from behind me. My heart raced as I turned to look once more, but once again, there was nothing there. I was starting to feel foolish, but the unease settled deeper. When the light turned green, I pressed on the gas, eager to get home. But a few blocks down, I saw a figure on the sidewalk. A young woman, looking frantic, waving her arms in desperation. I slowed down, my heart aching for her. "Do you need help?" I called out, rolling down the window. "Please, someone is following me," she gasped, her eyes wild with fear. "I think they're in your car." A chill gripped me, and my stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" I stammered, glancing nervously at my back seat. "Just drive. Don't stop," she pleaded, her voice rising in panic. Without thinking, I threw the car into gear and sped off, my heart pounding in my chest. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins as I glanced at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone following us. As we drove, I could see her shaking, trying to catch her breath. "What happened? Why were you running?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I was walking home, and I noticed a car behind me. It kept getting closer and closer," she explained, her eyes darting around as if she expected someone to jump out at any moment. I started to run, and when I looked back, I saw someone in the back seat of your car. My blood ran cold at her words. I wanted to dismiss it as a figment of her imagination, but the fear in her eyes told me otherwise. I could feel the weight of dread settling in my stomach, and I stole another glance at the rearview mirror. "Nothing. Just keep driving," she urged, her voice trembling. I pressed harder on the gas, trying to put distance between us and whatever was lurking in the shadows. After a few minutes, I turned onto a side street, hoping to lose any potential pursuers. I could hear her breathing heavily beside me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Suddenly, a loud thump echoed from the back seat, making me jump. My heart raced as I glanced over my shoulder. There, in the dim light, I saw a figure. A dark silhouette crouched low, hiding beneath the seat. Panic surged through me, and I felt a surge of adrenaline. "Get down!" I shouted, hitting the gas with all my strength. The car lurched forward, and I could hear the muffled sounds of movement behind me. I couldn't tell if it was the woman I had just picked up or someone else entirely. I turned onto a highway, desperate to find a place to pull over or signal for help. The highway was dimly lit, and the road stretched ahead like a dark tunnel. But just as I thought I might be safe, I saw headlights behind me. Another car, tailing us too closely. "Faster!" the woman urged, her voice frantic. I pushed the pedal to the floor, the engine roaring as I tried to outpace the vehicle behind us. But it was gaining on us, and I could feel panic clawing at my throat. Suddenly, the headlights blared, and I caught a glimpse of the driver. A man with a wild look in his eyes, his mouth twisted into a grin. I felt my heart stop. "He's coming for us," I yelled, my breath quickening. I swerved to the side, but the other car followed suit, staying right on my tail. I could feel the weight of fear pressing down on me, the reality of the situation crashing in. I needed to get away. In a desperate move, I turned into a rest stop, hoping to lose the other car in the maze of buildings and trees. I skidded to a halt, and the woman beside me was shaking uncontrollably. "We need to call the police," she gasped. I fumbled for my phone, but just as I reached for it, a loud bang echoed from the back seat, and I froze. The door swung open, and a figure lunged at me. My heart sank as I realized it was the man from the other car, his face twisted in rage. "Get out!" he screamed, reaching for me. I shoved the car into reverse, slamming into the gear to escape. As I backed away, I saw the woman bolt from the car, running into the shadows. I screamed for her to come back, but she was already gone. In that moment of chaos, I felt the weight of dread settle over me, knowing that I had lost her. In a blind panic, I sped away, driving as fast as I could down the highway, leaving the madness behind. As I looked in the rearview mirror, I could see the dark figure standing at the rest stop, watching me disappear into the night. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that I should have done something different. The memory of that night haunts me, a reminder that sometimes the real danger lies not just in the shadows, but in the very places we think we are safe. I never did find out what happened to the woman, and the thought of that killer lurking in the backseat still sends shivers down my spine every time I get into my car. The Vanishing Hitchhiker. It was a chilly autumn evening when I found myself driving along a deserted country road, the kind that seemed to stretch endlessly under the canopy of dark trees. The leaves were just beginning to turn, casting a kaleidoscope of colors across the landscape, but the beauty of the scene was lost on me. I had been working late and was eager to get home after a long week. As I navigated the winding road, I noticed a figure standing on the side of the highway, a young woman dressed in a white dress that fluttered in the breeze. Her hair hung loosely around her shoulders, and she looked lost, her eyes scanning the darkened road as if waiting for someone to rescue her. Something about her struck me as odd. It was late, and I hadn't seen another car for miles. I felt a mix of concern and curiosity bubbling up inside me. Against my better judgment, I slowed down and rolled down the window. "Do you need a ride?" I called out, hoping she would say yes. She turned to me, her expression lighting up with relief. "Oh, thank you. I didn't think anyone would stop," she said, her voice soft and melodic. I gestured for her to get in, and she slipped into the passenger seat, her white dress glowing faintly in the dim light of the dashboard. "Where are you heading?" I asked as I pulled back onto the road. "I need to get to the old church on Elm Street," she replied, looking out the window. "It's just a few miles from here." I nodded, and we drove in silence for a moment. I couldn't help but glance at her occasionally. She seemed quiet, lost in thought, and I felt a strange connection with her, though I couldn't quite place it. As we drove, I tried to make small talk. "What's your name?" I asked, but she didn't respond. Instead, she continued to gaze out at the darkened trees passing by. "Are you okay?" I asked, a sense of unease creeping over me. "You seem a little distant." "I'm fine," she said softly, but her eyes held a sadness that made my heart ache. I felt compelled to know more about her. "What happened? Why were you out here alone?" She took a breath, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. "I was at a party nearby. I needed some air, but I lost track of time. I didn't mean to worry anyone." I nodded, trying to reassure her. "You're safe now. We'll get you home." As we approached the church, the air grew heavy with an unsettling tension. "Just up ahead on the right," she said, pointing toward a darkened building that loomed in the distance. The old church looked abandoned, its windows shattered and the doors hanging ajar. I pulled over to the side of the road, and she turned to me, a soft smile on her lips. "Thank you for the ride," she said. "I really appreciate it." "Of course," I replied, but as I turned to face her, I noticed something strange. Her eyes glistened with an ethereal light, and for a fleeting moment, I felt a chill run down my spine. Before I could say anything, she opened the door and stepped out. "Wait!" I called after her, but she didn't turn back. Instead, she began to walk toward the church, her figure growing fainter in the dim light. Confused, I watched her go, and a sense of dread washed over me. Something felt off. I reached for my phone to check the time, but when I looked up again, she had vanished. The air around me felt thick, and the silence was deafening. I sat there, frozen in shock, trying to comprehend what had just happened. I rubbed my eyes, convinced that maybe I had imagined it, but I had seen her clearly, and the weight of her presence still hung in the air. After a few moments, I shook off the unease and decided to leave. I put the car in gear and drove away from the church, but as I turned to look one last time, I glimpsed her standing at the entrance, watching me with a sorrowful expression. My heart raced as I sped down the road, the feeling of unease now a full-blown panic. I couldn't shake the image of her face from my mind, nor could I forget the way she had just disappeared before my eyes. When I finally reached home, I rushed inside, my heart pounding. I needed to tell someone about the strange encounter. I grabbed my phone and called my best friend, recounting the story in a breathless rush. "Are you sure you're okay?" she asked, concern lacing her voice. "Are you sure it wasn't just a trick of the light?" I shook my head, trying to convince myself that it had been real. "No, she was there. I swear I saw her." Later that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled upon something otherworldly. I turned on the news, hoping to distract myself, and that's when it happened. The anchor was reporting on an accident from years ago, a tragic incident involving a young woman who had been killed on that very road. Her name was mentioned, Emily. Witnesses claimed to have seen her spirit wandering in search of something, the anchor said, and my blood ran cold. I realized with a sickening dread that I had given a ride to a ghost. From that night on, I never drove that road again. The memory of her haunting eyes and the way she vanished lingered in my mind, a chilling reminder of the vanishing hitchhiker. I still wonder what it was that she needed and whether she found her peace. But one thing was certain. Some encounters are better left unexplained, and some spirits are meant to wander alone. Chupacabra. It was late summer when I first heard the stories about the Chupacabra. Living in a small town nestled at the edge of a sprawling desert, tales of the creature had floated around for years, mostly dismissed as folklore. But after a series of unexplained animal deaths in the area, the fear began to creep in, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister was lurking just beyond the horizon. One evening, as the sun dipped below the dunes, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, I decided to take my dog, Max, for a walk. The air was still and heavy, the silence broken only by the soft crunch of gravel beneath our feet. I thought it would be a good way to clear my mind, to shake off the anxiety that had settled like a weight on my chest. As we ventured further from town, I noticed the atmosphere shifting. The air felt charged, almost electric, and I could sense that something was off. Max, usually full of energy, walked close to my side, his ears perked up, alert and tense. I tried to reassure him, but a knot formed in my stomach. As we reached the edge of a small clearing, I noticed something strange in the distance. It looked like a dark figure crouched low among the bushes. My heart raced as I squinted to get a better look. "Max, stay close," I whispered, feeling a chill run down my spine. I took a cautious step forward, and that's when I heard it. A low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the ground beneath me. The figure shifted, and I could make out its shape. It was unlike anything I had ever seen. Its eyes glowed like fiery embers, and its skin was a sickly gray, taut against its skeletal frame. In that moment, every story I had heard rushed back to me. and I realized with mounting terror that I was staring at the legendary Chupacabra. Panic surged through me, and I turned to run, but Max growled, his instincts kicking in. "Max, let's go!" I urged him, but he stood his ground, barking fiercely at the creature. The growl intensified, and the Chupacabra lunged forward, its claws glinting in the fading light. In a burst of adrenaline, I grabbed Max and took off, sprinting back down the path we had come. The sound of claws scraping against the dirt echoed behind us, and I could feel the creature gaining on us. My heart raced as I stumbled, nearly losing my footing, but I pushed myself to run faster, the sound of Max's barking urging me on. We burst into the open field, the moonlight bathing everything in a ghostly glow. I could see the faint outline of the town in the distance, but the Chupacabra was relentless, its growl reverberating through the night as it pursued us. "Just a little further, buddy," I shouted, my voice filled with desperation. We dashed toward the safety of the streetlights, their glow a beacon of hope. I could hear the creature's heavy breathing behind us, the sound striking terror into my heart. With every ounce of strength I had left, I pushed forward, finally reaching the edge of town. I could see the lights of nearby houses, the comforting presence of my neighbors. I stumbled onto the main road, glancing back just in time to see the creature stop short, its eyes glowing in the darkness, filled with an insatiable hunger. It hesitated at the boundary of the town, snarling in frustration, before retreating back into the shadows, its form melding into the darkness as quickly as it had appeared. I collapsed onto the pavement, breathless and trembling, Max panting beside me. I didn't sleep that night, the fear of what I had encountered keeping me wide awake. I could still see its eyes in my mind, the primal dread that came with knowing I had come face to face with a creature of nightmares. In the days that followed, I reported what I had seen to the local authorities, but they dismissed it as another tall tale, a figment of overactive imaginations fueled by the recent livestock deaths. But I knew what I had encountered was real. The nights grew longer, and the stories of the Chupacabra spread through the town like wildfire. People began to talk, sharing their own sightings and experiences, feeding the fear that had settled over us like a thick fog. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was out there, lurking just beyond the reach of the streetlights, waiting for another chance to strike. To this day, I'm cautious whenever I walk Max in the evenings. The desert is a beautiful but treacherous place, and as much as I want to believe the Chupacabra is just a myth, there's a part of me that knows the truth, that some legends are born from reality, and some nightmares are very much alive. The Slender Man. It was one of those late autumn evenings when the sun dipped below the horizon too quickly, leaving the world wrapped in an early darkness that felt almost suffocating. I was 13, just starting to grasp the thrill of exploring the woods that bordered my small town. My friends and I had heard the whispers about Slender Man, the tall, faceless figure that haunted the shadows of the forest, and like any group of curious kids, we decided to seek him out. "Let's go to the old oak tree," my friend Sarah suggested, her eyes sparkling with excitement. It was a massive tree deep in the woods, said to be a gathering place for anyone unfortunate enough to cross paths with the Slender Man. The stories had circulated for years, fueled by a mix of urban legend and internet folklore. We all knew the tales, but we were invincible in our youth, laughing off the warnings. As the sun set, we made our way into the woods, flashlights in hand. The air was chilly, and the leaves crunched beneath our feet, each step echoing in the stillness. We joked and laughed, trying to shake off the nagging feeling that clung to us like a shadow. When we finally reached the old oak tree, the atmosphere shifted. It stood tall and ominous, its gnarled branches stretching out like skeletal fingers against the darkening sky. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, and the laughter that had filled the woods moments before faded into an eerie silence. "Let's take a picture," Jake suggested, pulling out his phone. We huddled together, grinning nervously as he snapped a photo. But as the flash went off, I felt a strange chill run down my spine. It was as if something in the woods had shifted, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. "Did you guys hear that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The others nodded, their expressions turning serious. Just then, a rustling sound echoed from deeper within the woods, sending chills down my arms. "Probably just a deer," Sarah said, though her voice lacked conviction. But as we stood there, the rustling grew louder, almost rhythmic, like footsteps moving through the underbrush. "Let's get out of here," I urged, my heart racing. But before we could turn to leave, we all caught sight of something moving between the trees. A tall, slender figure that seemed to blend seamlessly into the darkness. It was impossibly tall, its limbs elongated and unnaturally thin. The moonlight caught glimpses of its pale skin, and I felt my breath hitch in my throat. It was the Slender Man, just like the stories had described. "Run!" I screamed, and we bolted in different directions, panic surging through me as I sprinted through the underbrush. I could hear my friends' voices fading behind me, the sound of their footsteps growing distant. I ran blindly, branches scratching at my face, the darkness closing in around me. I could feel a presence behind me, a sense of being pursued, and I pushed myself harder, my heart pounding in my chest. But as I stumbled through the woods, I tripped over a root and fell to the ground, gasping for breath. I turned to look back, and that's when I saw him. The Slender Man stood just a few feet away, his long limbs stretching toward me, his faceless head tilted in an unsettling way. I scrambled to my feet, terror gripping me. I dashed away again, but the woods seemed to twist and turn, disorienting me. I could hear whispers now, soft and haunting, echoing through the trees. "Join us," they seemed to say, pulling at the edges of my mind. Desperate, I pushed through the underbrush until I finally broke free into a small clearing, the moonlight illuminating the space. I stumbled to the ground, trying to catch my breath, but I could still feel his presence lurking in the shadows, just out of sight. I waited, heart racing, expecting him to emerge at any moment. The whispers faded, replaced by an oppressive silence that hung heavy in the air. After what felt like an eternity, I forced myself to move, trying to retrace my steps back toward where we had come. As I made my way back, I called out for my friends, but the only response was the rustling of leaves and the whisper of the wind. I felt a sense of dread creeping in, a realization that I was alone. Finally, I stumbled onto the path leading back to town, my heart racing with relief. But as I emerged from the woods, I realized something was terribly wrong. I looked around, searching for my friends, but they were nowhere to be found. Panic set in, and I ran home, the feeling of Slender Man's gaze burning in my memory. I rushed into my house, locking the door behind me, my heart pounding in my chest. But even as I sat there, trembling, I could still feel the weight of his presence lingering, like a shadow that refused to leave. Days turned into weeks, and I never spoke of that night again. My friends and I drifted apart, each of us haunted by our own memories. I learned later that 2 of them had gone missing, and the town was filled with whispers of the creature that had taken them. I still lie awake at night, staring into the darkness, afraid that one day the Slender Man will return for me, the embodiment of my fears lurking just beyond the reach of the light. I know he's out there, watching, waiting, and I can never truly escape the terror he brings. The Babysitter and the Man Upstairs. It was a chilly Friday evening when I took the babysitting job for the Johnsons. They were my neighbors, and their 2 kids, Lily and Max, were usually a delight to watch. I arrived at their house just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the lawn. The parents were getting ready for a night out, and I could hear the kids giggling as they played in the living room. After the Johnsons left, I settled onto the couch with a bowl of popcorn, ready to watch a movie with the kids. They were excited, and I let them choose something lighthearted. As we laughed and enjoyed the film, I couldn't shake off an odd feeling creeping in. The house felt eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that made me hyper-aware of every creak and groan of the old building. Once the movie ended, I tucked the kids into bed, reading them a story until their eyes grew heavy. After making sure they were asleep, I returned to the living room, the soft glow of the television casting flickering shadows across the walls. I settled back onto the couch, trying to distract myself with a show, but that nagging feeling was still there. Around midnight, I heard a peculiar noise coming from upstairs. A soft thud, followed by a faint scraping sound. My heart raced as I turned down the volume, straining to listen. It was quiet again, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I tried to convince myself it was just the house settling, but deep down, I felt something was off. I grabbed my phone, scanning through the dim light as I debated whether I should check on the kids. Then I heard it again, a soft sound, like footsteps. They didn't belong to the kids. They were too light, almost shuffling. Taking a deep breath, I stood up and tiptoed toward the stairs, each creak of the wooden steps echoing in the silence. As I reached the top, I paused, glancing down the dark hallway. The doors to the kids' rooms were closed, but I could feel an inexplicable urge to check on them. I pushed the door to Lily's room open, peering inside. She was fast asleep, her soft breathing calming my nerves. I turned to leave but hesitated when I thought I heard a whisper, something barely audible coming from the other end of the hall. My heart raced as I crept toward the sound, curiosity pushing me forward despite my instincts screaming to turn back. As I approached the door at the end of the hall, I felt a chill run down my spine. I reached for the doorknob, but just as my fingers brushed against it, I heard a voice, a low, gravelly whisper that sent a jolt of fear through me. "Check the kids." I stumbled back, panic surging through me. Who was speaking? I felt the urge to run, to get downstairs and call for help, but I had to make sure the kids were safe. I dashed back to their rooms, flinging open the doors. They were both still sleeping soundly, but I felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me. I retreated to the living room and grabbed my phone, dialing the Johnsons' number with trembling fingers. Just as I pressed call, the lights flickered, plunging the house into darkness. I felt my heart drop, and I quickly turned on the flashlight app, the beam cutting through the shadows. "Hello!" I heard a voice on the other end of the line, and I nearly shouted with relief. "Mr. Johnson, something's wrong. I think someone's in your house." "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice laced with confusion. "I heard noises upstairs. I'm scared," I replied, glancing nervously toward the stairway. Just as I was about to explain further, I heard a soft thud from above, followed by a slow, deliberate creaking sound. "Stay where you are. I'm on my way," he said, his voice urgent. But before I could respond, the line went dead. I felt a wave of panic wash over me as I realized I was completely alone. I had to get the kids. I grabbed my phone and rushed to their rooms, shaking them awake. "Lily, Max, wake up. We need to go." They stirred, confused and groggy, but I pulled them from their beds and urged them to follow me. As we raced down the hallway, I heard the footsteps again, louder this time, sounding as if they were right behind us. I glanced back, and my heart nearly stopped. At the end of the hall stood a figure, a silhouette with an elongated body and shadowy features. "Run!" I screamed, pushing the kids ahead of me as we bolted down the stairs. I could hear the figure following us, its footsteps echoing ominously in the silence of the house. The front door was just ahead, but as we reached it, I fumbled with the lock, my hands shaking uncontrollably. Come on," I urged, glancing back to see the figure drawing closer, its movements slow but relentless. Finally, the door clicked open, and I flung it wide, ushering the kids outside into the cool night air. We sprinted across the lawn, the darkness closing in around us, and I didn't stop until we reached the safety of the street. I turned to look back at the house, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The figure stood in the doorway, watching us, its featureless face impossible to read. A few moments later, I saw headlights approaching, the Johnsons returning home. I ran toward them, desperation fueling my steps. They pulled up, and I rushed to explain what had happened as the kids clung to my side. The police arrived shortly after, but when they searched the house, they found nothing. No intruder, no signs of forced entry, just the eerie silence of the Johnsons' home. Though I was relieved that the kids were safe, the memory of that night haunted me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister had been watching us, lurking just out of sight. To this day, I wonder what would have happened if I had ignored that voice, if I hadn't checked on the kids. And every time I hear a creak in the night, I can't help but remember the man upstairs. Bloody Mary. It was a typical sleepover with my friends, a night filled with laughter, snacks, and an endless supply of horror movie marathons. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, the atmosphere shifted. The room dimmed, and whispers of ghost stories began to circulate, each tale more chilling than the last. That's when Sarah suggested we try summoning Bloody Mary. I had heard the stories, how she was a vengeful spirit who would appear if you said her name 3 times in front of a mirror. I felt a thrill of fear and excitement at the thought. "Come on, it'll be fun," Sarah insisted, her eyes sparkling with mischief. We gathered in the bathroom, the small space illuminated only by the flickering light of a single bulb. The mirror loomed large in front of us, reflecting our anxious faces. I could feel my heart pounding as we stood in a circle, our breaths mingling in the cool air. "Are you sure we should do this?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. The others exchanged glances, but Sarah was determined. "We have to. It's just a game." With a collective intake of breath, we began. Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary. Each repetition felt heavier, as if the atmosphere thickened around us. I glanced at the mirror, half expecting to see something shift in the reflection. But nothing happened. "See? Nothing to be scared of." Sarah laughed, but her voice held an edge of nervousness. We decided to try again, this time louder, our voices echoing off the tiles. Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary. This time, the air felt charged, and a shiver ran down my spine. I leaned closer to the mirror, peering into the glass as if I could will something to appear. Just then, the light flickered again, plunging us into momentary darkness. I felt my heart race, a sense of dread creeping in. When the light returned, I caught a glimpse of something in the mirror, a shadowy figure standing just behind us. My breath caught in my throat as I turned quickly, but there was nothing there, just the empty bathroom. "Did you guys see that?" I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. "See what?" Sarah asked, her brow furrowed. I could see the uncertainty in her eyes, and I knew I wasn't imagining it. "Let's just do it one more time," I suggested, my voice shaking. The others nodded, and we gathered closer, our hands gripping each other for support. Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary. This time, the air felt electric, and a cold breeze swept through the bathroom, sending chills up my spine. I could see my own reflection, but something else seemed to flicker in the glass. A dark shape, barely visible, but undeniably there. "Did you see her?" I whispered, my heart racing. The others nodded, their faces pale. Suddenly, the bathroom door slammed shut, making us all jump. Panic surged through me, and I grabbed the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. "Open the door!" Sarah screamed, her voice rising in fear. I could hear the rattling of the handle, but it felt like we were trapped in the bathroom, the air growing heavier with each passing second. "Let's just call for help," I yelled, but as I turned to the mirror one last time, I saw her, Bloody Mary, her face twisted in rage, her eyes dark and hollow. I froze, unable to look away as she reached out toward us through the glass, her fingers stretching as if trying to break free from the confines of the mirror. "Get back!" I screamed, and in that moment, the lights flickered again, and I felt a cold hand brush against my shoulder. A scream tore from my throat as I turned, throwing myself against the door. With a final desperate push, I managed to yank the door open, and we spilled out into the hallway, gasping for air. We ran down the stairs, our hearts pounding, not stopping until we reached the living room. "What just happened?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking. The others looked equally terrified, their faces pale in the dim light. I tried to explain what I had seen, but my words tumbled over each other in a rush of panic. We decided to leave the bathroom behind, unable to shake the feeling that something had followed us. We huddled together on the couch, the weight of fear pressing down on us, the echoes of our laughter from earlier now replaced with silence. As the night wore on, we tried to distract ourselves with more movies, but the image of Bloody Mary lingered in my mind. I kept glancing at the dark hallway, half expecting her to emerge from the shadows. Finally, as dawn approached, we made a pact to never speak of that night again. But I could still feel her presence, that icy grip of fear that wouldn't let go. To this day, I can't look into a mirror without feeling a chill run down my spine, a lingering dread that Bloody Mary might still be watching, waiting for another chance to make her presence known. And every time I hear a whisper in the dark, I wonder if it's her, calling me back. The Hookman. It was a cool autumn night when my friends and I decided to go for a late-night drive. We were seniors in high school, eager to find adventure in the small town that had begun to feel too familiar. We piled into Jake's old car, the headlights cutting through the darkness as we cruised down the winding back roads, laughter filling the air. As we drove, someone brought up the legend of the Hookman, a terrifying story that had circulated in our town for years. According to the tale, a young couple had parked at Lover's Lane one night, only to be attacked by a man with a hook for a hand. The girl had survived to tell the tale, but the boy was never seen again. The thought of it sent a chill through me, but my friends laughed it off, dismissing it as just another urban legend. "Let's go to Lover's Lane," Sarah suggested, her eyes sparkling with mischief. I hesitated, feeling a knot of unease in my stomach, but the thrill of the night and the pressure of my friends' enthusiasm pushed me to agree. We arrived at Lover's Lane, the secluded spot surrounded by thick trees and dimly lit by the moonlight. It was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. Jake parked the car, and we all jumped out, the cool air hitting us like a wave. "Let's tell scary stories," Jake exclaimed, and we huddled together in a circle, sharing spooky tales that sent shivers down our spines. But as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. "Hey, do you guys hear that?" I asked, glancing around. The laughter faded as we all strained to listen. In the distance, I could hear a faint rustling sound, but it was quickly drowned out by the wind. "Just the trees," Sarah said, trying to sound brave, but I could see the uncertainty in her eyes. We decided to head back to the car, laughing nervously as we walked. But as we approached, something caught my eye, a glint of metal in the moonlight. "Guys, look!" I shouted, pointing toward the passenger side door. There, embedded in the door handle, was a hook, a rusty, jagged hook that seemed out of place in our carefree night. My heart raced as I recalled the stories of the Hookman. "Very funny. Someone's playing a prank," Jake said, trying to dismiss my growing fear. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. We climbed back into the car, the mood shifting as we locked the doors. "Let's just drive around for a bit," I suggested, eager to get away from the eerie atmosphere. We pulled out onto the road, the headlights illuminating the darkened trees lining the path. As we drove, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone following us. The road twisted and turned, and I felt increasingly restless. "Can we go back to town?" I asked, the unease gnawing at me. Just then, a loud thump echoed from the trunk, making me jump. "What was that?" I whispered, my heart racing. Jake shrugged, trying to stay calm, but I could see the tension in his eyes. "Probably just some branches," he said, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. We drove a little further, but the feeling of dread hung heavy in the air. Suddenly, the car began to sputter, and the engine made a strange noise before dying completely. We coasted to a stop on the side of the road, the darkness closing in around us. "Great, just great," Jake muttered, hitting the steering wheel in frustration. "Let's get out and check the engine," Sarah suggested, but I felt a wave of panic wash over me. "What if there's someone out there?" I protested, but my voice trembled, betraying my fear. "Fine, I'll go," Jake said, reluctantly stepping out of the car. As he opened the door, I caught another glimpse of the hook hanging from the door handle, and my heart dropped. "Stay close," I called after him, my voice barely above a whisper. I watched as he popped the hood, the dim light of the moon illuminating his face. Sarah and I sat in the car, glancing nervously at each other. The silence outside was oppressive, broken only by the sound of the wind rustling the leaves. After a few moments, I heard Jake call out, "I think it's just a loose wire." Relief washed over me, but my sense of unease remained. Just then, I heard it, a low, dragging sound coming from the trees. My heart raced as I turned to Sarah. "Did you hear that?" Before she could respond, I saw a figure emerge from the shadows. A tall man dressed in dark clothing, his face hidden beneath a hood. My breath caught in my throat as I recognized the hook in his hand, glinting ominously in the moonlight. "Get in the car!" I screamed, and we both scrambled to lock the doors just as he reached the driver's side window. I could see his face now, twisted into a menacing grin. He raised the hook, tapping it against the glass, and I felt my heart drop. In a frantic rush, Jake jumped back into the car, his eyes wide with fear. "What's going on?" he yelled, but I couldn't find the words. The figure outside leaned closer, the hook glinting threateningly. "Drive! Just drive!" I shouted, and Jake barely hesitated before turning the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and he slammed the car into gear, speeding away from the nightmare unfolding behind us. As we drove away, I glanced back and saw the figure standing in the road, watching us disappear into the darkness. The relief of escaping washed over me, but the terror lingered in my chest. When we finally reached town, we didn't stop to talk. We drove straight to my house, hearts racing, adrenaline pumping. I could still see the glint of the hook in my mind, the chilling reminder of how close we had come to something truly horrific. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that the Hookman is out there, waiting in the shadows for the next unsuspecting group of friends to wander too close. And every time I hear a rustling in the dark, I remember that night, the night we nearly became part of the legend ourselves. Bonus: the cursed doll. It was just another Saturday afternoon when my grandmother decided to clean out her attic. She was preparing to downsize, and we both knew that meant a treasure trove of forgotten memories. I always loved exploring the dusty corners of her house, and the attic was no exception. Climbing up the rickety ladder, I felt a thrill of excitement as I reached the top. The attic was dimly lit, filled with old trunks, boxes, and cobwebs that seemed to stretch across the rafters like ghostly tendrils. As I rummaged through the piles of old clothes and knickknacks, something caught my eye, a small, ornate box tucked away in the corner. It was beautifully carved with intricate designs, and I felt a strange pull toward it. Curiosity piqued, I opened the box, revealing a doll nestled inside. At first glance, it seemed like an ordinary porcelain doll, but as I lifted it out, an unsettling feeling washed over me. It was dressed in a faded, lace-trimmed gown, its glassy eyes staring blankly ahead. But what struck me was the odd expression on its face, a mixture of sadness and something darker, as if it held a secret that had long been buried. "Grandma, look at this," I called, but she was busy sorting through old books, barely acknowledging my discovery. I decided to take the doll downstairs with me, feeling a strange attachment to it despite my better judgment. That night, I placed the doll on my nightstand, its presence unsettling yet oddly comforting. As I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I told myself it was just my imagination, but I found it hard to relax. In the middle of the night, I was jolted awake by a soft, whispering sound. My heart raced as I turned to see the doll sitting upright on my nightstand, its eyes glinting in the moonlight. Confused and terrified, I blinked, thinking it was a trick of the light. But as I rubbed my eyes, the whispering grew louder, forming words that sent chills down my spine. "Help me, please." I bolted upright, my breath quickening. "What the hell?" I muttered, my voice barely above a whisper. I glanced around the room, but everything was still. The doll remained motionless, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that it was somehow alive. The next day, I decided to do some research on the doll. I found an old book in my grandmother's collection about haunted objects and curses. As I flipped through the pages, I stumbled upon a section about dolls that were said to be cursed. The stories were chilling. Tales of misfortune, strange occurrences, and families torn apart by the malevolent spirits that inhabited these dolls. My heart sank as I read about a specific doll that matched the one I had found. A girl named Lila who had been cursed after a tragic accident. The stories claimed that anyone who owned the doll would experience a series of misfortunes until they returned it to its original home. That night, I locked the doll in my closet, desperate to rid myself of its presence. But the whispering only grew louder, echoing in my mind as I tried to sleep. "Help me?" it called, haunting me in my dreams. I woke up in a cold sweat, convinced that I had to get rid of it once and for all. The next day, I took the doll back to my grandmother's attic, determined to leave it behind. As I placed it back in the ornate box, I felt a strange rush of relief, as if a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. But just as I turned to leave, the box slammed shut on its own, and I heard a voice, clear as day, echoing in the stillness. "Don't leave me!" Panic surged through me, and I stumbled back, racing down the ladder and out of the attic. I told my grandmother what had happened, but she brushed it off as a figment of my imagination. "It's just an old doll, dear," she said with a dismissive wave. But I knew better. I felt the darkness surrounding it, the curse that clung to it like a shadow. That night, I returned to my room, the doll still fresh in my mind. I tried to push it out of my thoughts, but as I lay in bed, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. "Help me, please!" I couldn't take it anymore. I jumped out of bed and rushed to the attic once more, determined to confront whatever evil resided within that doll. The moment I entered the attic, I felt a cold breeze sweep through the room, causing the hair on my arms to stand on end. I approached the box cautiously, my heart racing. As I opened it, the doll lay there, its eyes gleaming ominously. "You can't leave me," it whispered, the voice chilling me to the bone. I took a step back, the fear gripping me like a vice. "I'm not leaving you," I shouted, my voice shaking. But the doll merely smiled, its porcelain face twisting into a grotesque expression. "You belong to me now," it hissed, and in that moment, I felt an overwhelming wave of darkness wash over me, suffocating and oppressive. Without thinking, I grabbed the box and ran, racing down the stairs and out into the backyard. I found a small shovel in the shed and began to dig in the soft earth, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The whispers grew louder, echoing in my mind as I buried the box deep beneath the soil, desperate to rid myself of its curse. As I filled the hole, the whispers began to fade, but a sense of dread remained in the pit of my stomach. I felt as though I had only delayed the inevitable. That night, I lay in bed, the silence of my room heavy and thick, praying that I had finally put an end to the nightmare. But the next morning, as I stepped outside, I saw something that sent chills down my spine. There, in the spot where I had buried the doll, was a small mound of freshly disturbed dirt. Panic surged through me as I realized it had somehow returned to the surface. From that day on, I was haunted by the doll's presence. It would appear in the most unexpected places, on my nightstand, in my closet, even at school. The whispers never left me, growing louder and more desperate with each passing day. I tried to tell my grandmother, but she dismissed my fears, insisting that it was just a doll. But I knew the truth. It was cursed, and it wanted something from me. A piece of my soul, perhaps, or a promise I could never fulfill. To this day, I live in fear, always glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to find the doll waiting for me in the shadows. I've learned that some objects are better left undisturbed, and that curses can linger long after the object itself is buried. And every time I hear that whisper, "Help me," I know that I've only just begun to pay the price for my curiosity. Thank you for listening to today's compilation. Let me know in the commented what kind of stories you like to hear more from. Please stay safe and I'll be back next time.